Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Brainy Boomer Lecture Series. We're so very happy that you've all joined us today. In 2007, the McGill University Research Center for Studies in Aging, or the MCSA's Education Committee, started the Brainy Boomer Lecture Series in order to suggest practical steps to both improve and maintain brain health, as well as to promote healthy lifestyle choices amongst the most populous generation in history. The MCSA's Education Committee, which was founded in 1996, has three main objectives: identifying education needs of healthcare providers, seniors, caregivers, and the public, and to develop responses to meet some of their needs; to enhance the positive image of the aging process by addressing stereotypes and myths about aging; and finally, the dissemination of research on aging. Naila Kulman is a postdoctoral fellow in McGill's School of Physical and Occupational Therapy. Naila obtained her PhD in neuroscience from the University of British Columbia, in which she studied the neurobiology of Parkinson's disease in a mouse model. Throughout her studies, she became increasingly involved in science communication and outreach initiatives, and in exploring the fascinating intersection between sciences and the arts. Her postdoc project combines these various interests to facilitate knowledge exchange and spark conversation around neurodegenerative conditions. Before continuing, we would like to remind you to please mute your microphone on Zoom, and that if you have any questions, you can wait until the end of the conference, or you could write them down in the chat box on Zoom. And now I'd like to invite Naila to start her presentation, Peace of Mind, Connecting Scientific Research and Lived Experience Through Neurodegenerative Conditions Through the Performing Arts.
Firstly, I should unmute myself. Secondly, I should come up with a snappier title than that. But thank you very, very much for having me here today. It's really a pleasure to present some of my research from my postdoc. I want to start off with a little bit of context before I get into it. So, as Caitlin already mentioned, I did my PhD on Parkinson's disease. And I started almost every presentation throughout my PhD with this iconic image. So this is the first report of Parkinson's disease by James Parkinson's back in 1817. And this is an illustration characterizing some of the motor impairments that come with Parkinson's. But in reality, I was studying a mouse model of Parkinson's, and even further down the scale, I was studying brain slices and neurons, so brain cells from mice in this mouse model of Parkinson's disease. So here's an image of me recording the electrical activity of a brain slice, a mouse brain slice. And I also spent a lot of time looking under the microscope at the beautiful inner universe of the brain. So looking at the complexities of how neurons communicate with one another and how this has changed in Parkinson's disease. What I didn't do throughout my PhD is connect significantly with people who are living with Parkinson's. I'm going to say PD instead of Parkinson's disease, otherwise I'll repeat myself a lot. So while I did give research talks and I did have some conversations with people living with PD, I had very little perspective of what the experience is from day to day living with this disease. Some of the resulting images and journal publications from my PhD look like this. So this is a simplified version of some of what we think is happening at the cellular level and between neurons in Parkinson's disease. And as you can see, it's not accessible to the general public. And just for context, I think my PhD thesis has been read by less people than are on this call right now. So obviously there's a pretty big gap between how we communicate as scientists and the knowledge we share with one another, and how we're sharing it with the general public. And to address this gap, a number of very beautiful projects have been emerging, many of which are actually based in Canada. So this is from a team at the University of Toronto who created a theater piece around the lived experience of dementia. So this was based on interviews with people with dementia and family members. This is a piece on psychosis among young adolescents, and this is a dance piece that was created to represent some of their experiences. And even circus has been used to represent, for instance, the experience of epilepsy. So I think that the performing arts are a really beautiful way to represent some of the emotional aspects and the lived experience of living with a neurological condition, or aging more generally as well. But I'm also convinced that it's a really beautiful way to represent the complexity of what's happening underneath the hood, what's happening underneath the microscope in this case. So with that in mind, the goals of my postdoc project are to facilitate knowledge exchange and empathy or understanding between researchers, especially lab-based researchers, performing artists, and people who are living with dementia or Parkinson's disease. And just for, well, to fill you in on why dementia, my research lab that I'm a part of now, the lab of Dr. Stephanie Blaine-Moraes, studies Alzheimer's disease and dementia, amongst other things. So I'm doing two parallel projects, one on PD and one on dementia. And the ultimate goal is to co-create performance pieces that are based on scientific research and lived experience, and that can engage with a wide audience and hopefully spark meaningful dialogue around these conditions. The media that we're using are circus, dance, music, spoken word, poetry. So it's really a multidisciplinary project. And we take a participatory approach. So we're integrating the perspectives, as you saw, of researchers, artists, people living with these conditions, as well as caregivers. And that's both in the research and creation phase of the project, as well as in the performances and all of the supplementary materials being created. The research, so the outcome measures that I'm looking at are whether the collaborative process increases knowledge exchange and understanding. So I'm doing qualitative analysis on this, as well as tracking new partnerships that result from this project. And then I'm also looking at the audience impact. So can these performances spark meaningful dialogue? Can they change perspectives of dementia and PD? And I'm looking at engagement indicators as well. So how much people look at the videos that we share online or how much they share them as well. So a little bit of the methods of this project. So keeping in mind that I have two parallel projects going, both started back in September with the recruitment. So we recruited around 20 participants for each project, and that's a mix of different communities. And then from there, the first step was to create little art science videos. So these were little science communication videos around Alzheimer's disease research, Parkinson's research, or dementia research. And we brought in different research collaborators to do this. So this was mostly PhD students who are working on different research areas related to these conditions. And they worked with our team virtually to produce little science communication pieces of around 2 to 5 minutes. So music pieces, dance, and circus. From there, we went on to having virtual community sessions. So this was to exchange knowledge, as I mentioned, and to identify the main themes and concepts for the performance pieces. This was done because of COVID. It was done over Zoom bi-weekly, and we had 6 sessions of around an hour and a half. And during this time, we integrated some of the concepts that we had played with in the art science collaborations. We used dance and music to explore things through the body and through creativity, and also to facilitate discussion on the lived experience of these conditions, as well as the research. And I encouraged participants to end with reflective journaling. So after each session, I encouraged them to write down a few notes about that session. We've now moved into the content creation phase. So this is where we're putting together everything that we learned in the sessions, both from research and from lived experience. This is being done in studio. So the performers are slowly being able to meet in person, but we're also using a lot of virtual collaboration to involve the whole team. And we're building on some of these art science pieces. We're using a lot of poetry, music, improvisation techniques, and choreography. And at this point, I would really like some community feedback. So just feedback from potential audience members. So just a note that you can, of course, give me comments after the presentation or also put them in the survey that the Brainy Boomers team sends out. So we're hoping to have a first version of our performances in the summer, so in June or July, and to really integrate audience participation and feedback, and to have supporting materials that provide more context of all the information that's put into the performances. And lastly, as I mentioned, the research aspect of this, I'll be looking at both the process, so bringing in the reflective journals, interviews and partnerships, and then looking at the audience response as well, once we have the performances. So with all of that behind us, let's move into each project separately. And I'd like to start by giving you a quick overview of the art science pieces that were created. So I have about 3 or 4 pieces that were created. Unfortunately, I can't show them now because they're each 2 to 5 minutes long, but you can look at them on YouTube afterwards if you want. I can send out the link. So this first piece was created with a researcher who studies sleep and memory consolidation and how it might be changed in Parkinson's disease. So a lot of people with PD have sleep impairment. So they don't sleep regularly or it's fragmented, and that might affect memory consolidation. So one of the musicians took a melody and sort of changed it over time and made a very dreamy piece to represent this. I'm going to play it as I go through the other ones, but I'll put the sound down so we can hear what I'm saying. Whoops, if it wants to play. So it's a very calm piece, and I'll just turn down the volume and have it as background as I go through. So this next piece was created actually from a researcher in the lab that I was also part of for my PhD. So she was looking at really what's happening at the level of neurons communicating at the molecular level. And this was represented by 2 dancers. So that's on synaptic transmission. We also had a piece on REM sleep behavior disorder. So this is a condition where you act out your dreams. And this is actually, okay, now I'm gonna stop the music because it's actually distracting for me, but you can listen to it later. Oh. So the REM sleep behavior disorder is a condition that often precedes Parkinson's disease. A lot of people who act out their dreams regularly develop Parkinson's later in life. And so one of the dancers sort of explored how one might react to knowing that you have this condition and that you could develop Parkinson's. And then the last piece was on dance therapy. So this was a piece about how dance, music, and community support can turn someone who might have motor complications and might be struggling on the ground into a performer in the air. So this is a slight exaggeration, but we had this little acrobat, this finger acrobat on a tightrope, really performing and being a performer, and yeah, just this idea of dance and music supporting movement. So this is just a very quick snapshot of our Zoom session. So we did not intend to do this project virtually at first, and so we had to adapt. And I'd like to give a big shout out to Rebecca, who I believe is on this call. So she's the dancer and the researcher who led these sessions. And she was really great at connecting us over Zoom. So using different dance exercises that, you know, we played with the squares and we played with mirroring one another, and it was very goofy. We just had a lot of fun, but we also integrated some of the art science pieces, some discussion on the research and discussion of the lived experience of Parkinson's. And we formed a really nice group. It's been really rich experience to be sharing this time on Zoom. So from that experience, I pulled out some emergent themes, which we are building on now. The first is moving past motor limitations. So as you likely know, Parkinson's disease is in large part a motor disease. So you have motor impairments. And we talked a lot about movement with Parkinson's being very concentrated. So both in the sense that it's much smaller than my movements, which are often all over the place, but also that it takes much more intention to produce the same movement. So I don't think about all of the movements I do in a day, where someone with Parkinson's has to be a lot more intentional with their movement. We also talked about resilience, how to build resilience against motor limitations, and about abandon, so just letting go, for instance, when we dance together. We discussed strategies that the participants with Parkinson's use to overcome moments of rigidity or blocks. And one of the art science pieces I showed, the dancer called it Dance Your Dilemmas, which I find is a very fitting representation of this discussion. And this is a quote in French from one of the participants. I'll translate it. So it's how can we translate the feeling of how motor limitations influence what's happening in the mental landscape? So what's happening inside our heads? Which brings me to the invisible aspects of Parkinson's disease. So Parkinson's is much more than tremor, which is what it's often characterized as. For people who don't know it so well, they just see the shaking. Parkinson's is so much more than that. And so we talked about vulnerability, isolation, chaos, heightened emotions, not being able to filter information the same way that you used to, and how disorienting that can be. One of the participants said, again in French, that even though it might not appear that way, we really feel the symptoms on the inside. So there's a lot that is not visible from the outside. And we also talked about positive aspects, so that Parkinson's has opened this participant to the beauty of the world, its fragility and its tenderness, and many new dimensions to life that he had previously not seen. Rhythm of life and perception of time was a big theme. So when you're living with Parkinson's, often it can be very unpredictable from day to day or even from moment to moment. So there are medications that help with managing the motor symptoms, for example, but these often have on and off periods. So times that it's working really well and times where it's not working at all. And so we talked about functional time and how this is regulated by medication, how someone described Parkinson's as being a temporal handicap or a handicap in time, and that you go from moments of fluidity to rigidity. And there's a beautiful musical comparison here to make, or parallel, which is tempo rubato. So the idea of stolen time, or of a musician playing at an unpredictable rhythm and really changing without, in that sense. Also some positive aspects, so that Parkinson's brings you into the present moment, the ineffability and impermanence. And then the fourth theme was sort of a meta theme about our project, which was the common thread between us all. So how, we're connecting over Zoom about from very different perspectives, but there's somehow a common thread, or there's the tightrope, or there's the telephone wire. There's lots of different parallels that we found between us all. And one of the researchers said, the more threads we pull from others, the more beautiful the fabric of our own lives becomes. So how are we building on these? The first one, the moving past motor limitations, we would like to create a choreography that's based on daily movements. So things that I do throughout the day without thinking about them, but that are much more difficult for someone with Parkinson's. And so this piece would really be representing, or just making people aware of how little we are aware of our own movement sometimes. And it could have on-off periods. So we could play with the rhythm, have it be very rhythmic and synchronous to very arrhythmic and asynchronous, and still beautiful, but just different, and explore how movement changes with Parkinson's. And for this, I would really like some input from the community. So we're interested in some analogies of how Parkinson's has complicated movement or some little movement challenges for the artist. So our idea is not at all to mimic someone with Parkinson's, it's to try to put ourselves in situations where our regular movement isn't as easy anymore and that we feel some of those challenges, as well as strategies to overcome them. So how do people with Parkinson's manage their symptoms? What's some of this knowledge that we could also disseminate in our piece? In terms of the invisible aspects, we're working with a poem that was done by one of the participants about Parkinson's being like walking on a tightrope. So the physical imbalance, but also the imbalance of all of the different emotions and the different tribulations. We're also thinking of creating a piece on diagnosis stories. So having people with Parkinson's talk about the first moment that they realized they might have Parkinson's, and then representing some of the visual parts of the story that you don't see, or even what's happening inside the brain as someone is having this life-changing realization. And then for the rhythm of life, we created a group poem on the perception of time, and also how time in research takes so much longer. You know, research takes so much longer than what's happening to someone from day to day. And we also, some of the participants have started working on musical diaries to represent the perception of time. And this is what I would like to show you now. So I have several little clips from the musical diaries they've been doing over Zoom. So it all started with a little improvisation exercise that we did together. So in some of the Zoom sessions, we worked in groups of 3. So one person living with Parkinson's, one artist, a musician or dancer or circus performer, and one researcher. And we focused in on one question, and we went from the lived experience, how to represent it through art, and then how to bring in the scientific context. So the researcher would link their own research back to the experience of the person with Parkinson's. So I'm going to show you a clip. This is about 5 minutes long, so I'll let it play. And then I have several clips that build on this. And this is Anne, who is living with Parkinson's, Anusha, who is the researcher who is in the same lab that I did my PhD in, and Louise, the musician. And this is on the perception of time.
Time for a person with Parkinson's is it's true. It's quite different, and it's measured in different parts of the day. There's the day part where when you wake up, you're off medication. Actually, what the minutes and the hours do not meter your time. It's the pills, it's the medication that meters your time. So it's not something that's quote, unquote natural. It's added chemicals that makes you in a good part of your day, or in a part of your day where your body is processing the medication, but you hope that it's going to do its job. And then the part where, oh yay, I'm feeling good, so I'm going to do something, and I'm happy, and then there's a part where, oh no, the medicine is slightly going off, and I can feel it because I'm so acute to that, like all of the micro little shifts of my brain and my body and my how I receive and how I read the outside world.
So time is huge in music.
Yeah.
Music is time. So there are so many possible ways that I could respond to this, and so many possible ways that we could use music in order to try and transmit this idea. I want to put you in charge of time for me. So what I want you to do is you're going to tell me to start, or you're going to tell me how to change. I'm just going to play. But I want you to tell me when to change and how to change. So if you want time to be fast, put your hand way up. If you want time to get slower, go down. If you want it to be like almost immobile, like be so that you're almost touching the bottom of the screen. And you can change whenever you want to. And I want you to like conduct me in kind of the way that time feels to you.
Okay.
How did you say the beginning of your day starts?
Waking up. Should I qualify it? Like, I'm always
without medication, yeah?
Yeah, without medication, but yay to a new day. So it's a little bit ambivalent. Like, I I'm very shaky and I'm very off physically, but I'm glad to be alive. And then the wait starts.
Okay.
Oh no. Oh, I'm sorry. I was trying to correct the sound. Let me.
Put your hand way up if you want, in kind of the way that your day starts.
Waking up. Should I qualify it? Like, I'm always
without medication, yeah?
Yeah, without medication, but yay to a new day. So it's a little bit ambivalent. Like, I I'm very shaky and I'm very off physically, but I'm glad to be alive. But then the wait starts.
Okay, sounds good.
So it's
in scientific sense, I was thinking in two different thoughts. So the first is, like you said, because it's a chemical input, I started thinking about like the effects of things like psychedelic drugs, for instance, that really change how you perceive time and what you can do with your time. You know, even in your sleep, like they're working, a lot of them do work on the same systems that involve dopamine. So there is a lot of parallel. In fact, like when Louise was playing, I just kept thinking of Alice in Wonderland.
So unfortunately, I can't turn up the volume. I tried, I can't turn it up further. So hopefully you can just adjust your volume on your end and hopefully you can still hear. In the second version, so that was the little improvisation that led to the musical diaries. So the Anusha, Louise, Anne, and now Claire, who is a tap dancer and a violinist, are meeting every week to see how Anne's perception of time is that day and to explore different topics around time and Parkinson's disease. And so in this one, this is a lot less well, let's say that it's a bit more chaotic in terms of the clarinet playing. So I warn you in advance if you don't like crazy jazz, but I think it's a really meaningful one to show as well. So I'm going to start this one a little further in here.
My dopamine is not working right now. And I'm like super impatient and I'm like, tomorrow. So it's sort of like I have to all this energy that's hyped up, that's all stuck in a ball, and then it's sort of like I have to release it, and then I'm okay for a few seconds. I feel better, but then it starts again. Just that until the dopamine kicks in, hopefully in a half an hour. So that's how I feel right now. But I thought we were working on something to translate in another vocabulary than on a scale of 1 to 10. How do you feel about this? How about or forever and whenever and ever? And I thought how can anybody feel anything about how I feel in my body with these scales? It's impossible. But I think for the first time, this last time, I really feel that you could understand a little bit more how I feel.
This process is the first time that I feel like I'm starting to understand something of what you're living. And that to me is amazing, because I don't have a lot of contact with, I don't know much about Parkinson's.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like through you, I'm starting to learn something about what it might be like to live with it.
And unfortunately, Anusha, if you're listening, I'm going to cut you off there. Anusha also talks about the perspective of a researcher and how this project has brought her new perspective on her research. But in the interest of time, I'm going to skip her. Sorry about that, Anusha. So in this piece now, this is the following week, so a couple weeks ago, and Anne is talking about her sleep-wake cycle. So during the night, her sleep is very fragmented, but she's stopped fighting the insomnia, and now she really enjoys both her sleep time and her wake time during the night. But this piece was looking at, through tap dance, the moments before falling asleep when the Parkinson's, tremors and other symptoms act up a lot. So it's can be a fairly frustrating moment from what I understand. And then the sweet relief of sleep. So we represented that through tap dance, and Anusha responded through piano, because Anusha also is a musician. So here we go.
Okay.
So that went on for a little bit, and there was multiple explorations, but I want to show you one last one. So this was last week, and this was getting into more of the emotional and psychological aspects of Parkinson's disease. So at least from Anne's experience and from the other participants in this project, there was a lot of talk about heightened emotions and not being able to regulate emotions as well, and just having this ball of energy, this anxiety and tension. And so this exploration is with Claire on her violin and Anne conducting Claire around this idea.
Wow. That was it.
So maybe I should have warned you there would be some screechy violin music, but obviously not all of the experience is positive, and so we have some more chaotic music in our piece. So I'd like to move on to talk about the Alzheimer's disease and dementia project. So let's start again with the art science pieces that were created for this. And so for this piece, Claire, who we just saw on the violin, created a tap dance piece representing what's happening at the cellular level. So what happens in the brain with Alzheimer's disease and how this affects the loss of memories. We also had a piece on cognitive reserve. So this was one of the acrobats doing a balancing act where she's representing all of the different things that support our cognitive well-being. So things that can protect against cognitive decline. So whether it's learning new languages or learning an instrument or reading a lot or reciting math, it's quite a lighthearted piece that she created. We have a more sort of conceptual piece around aging and neurodegeneration. So this was done in collaboration with a researcher who does some genetics research and how different genetic different genetic mutations are related to neurodegeneration, but also resilience. We have a piece by Louise, the musician that we saw on the clarinet. So this one is more about the experience of dementia, so the loss of memory, but also holding on to the names of loved ones. And also, as there is loss, there's also new things that emerge. So this is a piece of art that Louise did with her grandmother who had dementia. And so this sharing time together and creating in a new way, even though perhaps she can't remember the names as well. And this last piece was on frailty and resilience. So this piece was exploring memory loss and memories being like a stack of papers and a fan coming and blowing away the papers at the top. So those are the most recent memories that are lost first, often with dementia, whereas the memories at the bottom, the really old memories, often are retained. And at the same time, there's a dancer playing with the idea of being wrapped increasingly in fabric and perhaps losing, kind of getting lost in the folds and maybe not being able to communicate with the outside world in the same way as before. But maybe there are also some new things that emerge from that. So just in terms of the emergent themes from our community sessions, a big one was shifting relationships. So we had some spouses, we had 2 married couples in our community sessions, and as well as a daughter and a mother. And they talked a lot about, especially the caregivers, so the partners talked a lot about losing their confidants, their companion, the person they knew, so the person they married or perhaps their mother or father. No longer being able to rely on their partner in the same way, so having to take on more responsibility, and often this role reversal of things they used to rely on their partner for, they were now doing for their partner. The loss of independence, so both for the caregiver who is now charged with really paying attention to their partner all the time, but also the loss of independence of someone living with dementia and maybe no longer being able to do the things that they used to. So there was a lot of talk of frustration, resentment, vulnerability, and from the caregiver perspective, a fear of being too controlling. But I should also say there was some positive aspects. So just really cherishing relationships and being blessed to spend time together and to discover, for instance, in a child parent, to really take the time to learn about your parent. So another thing was the things that are lost with dementia and the things that are gained or retained. So this was both acknowledging the grief and the tragedy of living with dementia, but also the humorous aspects and the new discoveries. One thing that came up a lot was the loss of driving, which is a loss of independence, but continued walking. So really enjoying going for long walks together and still being able to do that. A loss and gain of social activities. So of course, with dementia, you lose some of the things that you could once do, but there are also a lot of great programs. So we work with AGI, and there's also the Alzheimer Society that provide a lot of different social activities. So for instance, dance programs online that have been really, really crucial for the participants in this study. Emerging, so new interests that emerge or new parts of someone's personality that weren't there before. So for instance, one of the women with dementia now loves coloring and loves art, and she never expressed any interest in that before. So just discovering new aspects of oneself, and also the connection with family was a big theme. And then addressing stigma and living well with dementia came out as the key message that we would like to send through our performance piece. So addressing the discomfort and fear that many people feel about dementia and Alzheimer's disease, really focusing on the fact that people living with dementia are still human. They still have their agency and personhood, and they need a lot of love and care and patience and respect. We want to find ways to talk about dementia, or the participants with dementia wanted to find ways to talk about it without feeling like they're a burden on their family members or loved ones. And also to highlight hopeful treatments and therapies that are emerging for Alzheimer's disease and dementia. So to build on those, for shifting relationships, we've been working on creating a musical piece that would take a song that everyone in our group really loved. So that's Amore, and have people humming it and singing it. So maybe involving more people from the community who would be interested in taking part in this piece, and also in sharing little anecdotes about daily caregiving and relationships with dementia. And we're working on a hand-to-hand acrobatic duet, which I'll show in a minute. For things lost and things gained, we're exploring this idea of memory loss and being like papers flying away. And what we'd like to do is have people from the community submit some cherished memories, whether it be written, it could be by email, it could be by a letter, or it could also be a recording. And then really play with this idea of how do we protect memories? How do we maybe give them away to loved ones? How do we hold memories between us, and so on? We're also really focused on cognitive resilience. So how can we inform ourselves about Alzheimer's disease research, for instance, and how do books, how could that be used to weigh down some of those papers and protect those memories, for instance? And layers of identity. So building on this piece with the entanglement in the fabric. So some parts of your identity might get lost or might get hidden from the outside world, but maybe we could project new parts of the identity onto this fabric. That's something that we're exploring. In terms of addressing stigma, so throughout the piece, we'll focus a lot on community support and family ties. So again, having the names of loved ones anchor us and orient us through life, and adaptation to dementia. So what are some ways that our participants or other community members have adapted to living with dementia? So I'm not sure how I'm doing with time. I'd like to show this first piece that we're working on, and then if I have time, I'll show the second, but I'd also like to take some time for questions. So this is a piece between two acrobats. This is a duet, and they're very comfortable working with each other. So you'll see in a second where this goes. But they start out showing the man carrying the woman. So this is a romantic relationship between a man and a woman, and he's really supporting her. And it starts with this really beautiful ballad of them, you know, sweeping through the room, dancing through the room with her looking out onto the world. And these really tender, beautiful moments between them. Then at some point there's a shift, and sorry for the blurry images. This was from our first little filming of their first version of this piece, so it's not complete yet. But there's a shift at some point where he's more hesitant, or he doesn't react to the same way to, you know, she's holding out her hand for him to take, and he's not reacting quite the same way. And although she gets back up onto his shoulders, she's doing a lot more of the work now to get on his shoulders. And when she's back up there and they sort of do the same ballad that they did at the beginning, it's not quite the same, and she notices there's something different. So then next, she starts recognizing, okay, I need to take on some of the responsibility and the support. I need to support him more. And so we explore how are different ways that she could carry him and eventually take his full weight, so fully support him. Also, you know, this is a struggle. She's a lot smaller. It's a lot more difficult for her to support the weight. And there's a loss of, you know, she's trying to find what she had before with him, and that's maybe changed, and, you know, the grief of not having the same relationship that you did before. And so it ends on this fairly heavy note for now, but what we would like to do is integrate more of the idea again of community support and of people, other performers coming in and carrying both of their weight, and new ways that this relationship can progress, even though it might not be the same as before. So this was an exploration of the memory, so the flying papers and the different ways that we could protect memories or share memories, or, you know, also bring in research of Alzheimer's disease. It's about a 3-minute clip, so I'm going to skip it, and then if we have time at the end, I can play it, or maybe I can send it out. So I just want to end with a quick timeline, a bit of perspective of where the project is going next. So we are still working on the content creation. So we're, as I said, virtually and in person working on the performances. We plan to film the performances and present them virtually at the end of June or beginning of July. And we hope that we can do a live version maybe later this fall. At the same time, we're creating a making of documentary and supplementary materials for the performance. So that's going to give more context of the whole project. And I'm collecting data on both the process, so all of the creative process that went in and how people connected throughout this project, as well as the audience response once we do the performances. And then I'll be analyzing all of that and disseminating the research through articles and conferences and so on. Some dates. So next week I'll be presenting in French. I'll present some different clips than I did today. We're hoping to plan a small outdoor event if it's possible, maybe at the end of May or later this summer. We're planning a virtual event to look at some research on Parkinson's, particularly music and dance research, and to do a little interactive event around that. And I'd like to organize a similar thing for the Alzheimer's and Dementia Project as well. And then we'll be filming the performances at the end of June. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention today. And I'd really like to thank particularly the whole Peace of Mind team. It's been a pleasure to work with such multifaceted and talented individuals. And you can find us on social media. You can also email us. I'll put it in the chat. And of course, I would also like to thank the labs that I'm a part of at McGill and our sponsors and collaborators. That's it.
Thank you so much, Nyla, for that fantastic presentation.